Omar, as you have been discussing this in the communities, Arab American communities throughout the country, how do you bring this whole storyline that has developed into a space where Arab American communities can feel like things are okay for them, given that there are two elected officials who represent these communities?
So there's no question that both these congresswomen are the victims of a smear campaign. They're accused of anti-Semitism, which is a very common accusation against anybody who's critical of Israel's human rights violations against Palestinians. And Israel effectively proved their point by barring them entry, because they were primarily going to visit the Palestinian territories, and Israel basically declared that the Palestinian people are not a free people who can have a say in who gets to come and see them, but are a captive population living under Israeli military control, and that anybody who wants to see them, including American lawmakers, must get Israel's permission in order to be able to do that. And that is precisely what they were criticizing in the first place. And the idea that a country that is the single largest recipient of U.S. aid, they receive $40 billion in military aid every decade, for them to then be putting conditions on American members of Congress, on lawmakers, about having to surrender their right to free speech and to have to surrender advocacy for putting economic pressure on Israel to respect human rights as a precondition for entering to meet with Palestinians is absolutely outrageous. And I think any American of conscience should absolutely be outraged by what is unfolding.
When we look at this, three branches of power here in the United States here, Peter, and we're looking at one, seemingly for some, if you're to be critical, the White House, the executive branch in this case, affecting the ability for the parliamentary or the House members now unable to visit another country. That's certainly one dynamic. But there's, in addition to that, this ability of the executive branch to discuss with another leader of another power something and being able to get that other leader to agree with him and therefore say, hey, you can't come into our country. There's a couple dynamics of the very power structure that you report on the White House here, Peter.
Well, yeah, in effect, he's exporting his own domestic political battles overseas, beyond the borders. He's asking his friend, Prime Minister Netanyahu, to take action against people who have been his favorite targets, who have been critical of him. And so we are expanding, in effect, the domestic debate we're having inside the United States about President Trump's administration, and we're expanding it to other countries at this point. It's not just about what their views are of Israel and whether or not they're anti-Semitic or not. It's also about the fact that these have been two of his favorite targets lately. In his argument going into 2020, he's trying to make them, he explicitly says so, he's trying to make them the face of the Democratic Party so as to tarnish the opposition as being radical and therefore unelectable. And
as all of us have traveled to different countries, we are seeing this dynamic of executive power being carried out in different countries and different continents. Ambassador Ginsburg, as we look at this now as a somewhat parallel in Israel with Netanyahu, the question might be, you know, what might be next? What is the big worry, or is this a good development?
No, it isn't a good development. I happen to believe that any member of Congress should be entitled to travel, particularly to Israel. The fact that Mr. Trump continues to interfere in the internal affairs, even of allies, and to throw his weight around and export his political domestic agenda on allies, particularly Benjamin Netanyahu, a willing recipient, is frankly not only distasteful, but also distasteful to those of us who support a bipartisan agenda, essentially to support Israel as well as a two-state solution. I mean, I make no mistake about it, Richard. I have long supported a two-state solution, but I'm not certain that these two congresswomen are showing the same type of care and balance in their own interests, which is one of the reasons why I'm torn. Because if they had said that they were going to visit Israel and joined a bipartisan CODEL or congressional delegation that was already there, all the power to them, but they wanted to go off on their own and not to share any time with Israeli leadership. That really shows that they had an agenda that was going to be inconsistent with Israel.
Omar, final word.
Ilhan Omar shared a tweet by which she was going through the itinerary, and they were supposed to be with members of the Knesset, both both Arab and Jewish members of the Israeli Knesset. So that is just categorically not true. But I just want to emphasize one thing: anybody who supports the two-state solution should primarily be outraged about the fact that Israel does not support a two-state solution. In fact, Israeli members of the ruling coalition sent a letter to members of Congress objecting to the fact that the American Congress still invokes the language of the two-state solution. So anybody who supports an end to the occupation, which is a prerequisite to a two-state solution, ought to primarily be targeting their criticism towards the Israeli government. And that is precisely what the boycott movement does. It's because Israel rejected the Palestinian compromise for a two-state solution that the boycott movement exists in the first place, because saying that once the world community has failed to place enough diplomatic pressure on Israel to get them to stop building settlements on top of the Palestinian territories and to end that occupation, that it then was left over for activists to step in and apply that economic pressure directly in order to achieve that peaceful solution and justice that everybody is looking for.
Omar Baddar, Mark Ginsburg, Peter Baker, thank you and have a good Saturday.
Thank you.